This lily is ideal for practicing your shading and blending skills. While I work on this for you, I'll concentrate on layering and shading, and in particular blending. First, we need a guideline drawing, so we can concentrate on building the form and texture without having to think about the shape and position. As with any drawing, before you begin you need to know a few things about the subject and your goals. The lighting, where is the light shining from? Or if you're adventurous, where would you like it to shine from? The line drawing has no lighting or three-dimensional information, so you can light it from any direction. But for simplicity, I'll use the current lighting, shining from the top right. Identify the main highlights and shadows so you have a basic plan. What do the petals feel like? Imagine running your fingers over them. I think they're smooth and waxy and fairly thick. So now you know what you're drawing. It's no longer a set of featureless shapes. Draw a box about 4 inches, 10 centimeters square. Smaller if you want to, but not too small, or you might have difficulty with the blending in the tight areas. Now draw the outline of your lily. I recommend using a 2B lightly. It can be completely erased and it won't indent your paper. I've drawn it darker than I usually would so you can see it, but before I begin on each area I'll fade the outlines. You've already worked out or decided where the light is shining from, so I suggest you draw an arrow in the margin as a constant reference and reminder. Now remember the highlights and shadows question? I think the lily will be darkest deep down in the throat, and the very darkest is going to be this tiny triangle. Now I know the lightest value, the white of my paper, and the darkest, so every other value has to fall between these two. And now I have those two reference points, I find the intermediate values almost fall into place automatically. Don't be surprised if you find yourself drawing darker than you expected to, because you'll want to make natural sense of that initial dark triangle. In any case, when you blend, that will lighten your values to some extent. Let's make a start. I'll begin by shading the bottom of the big 10 o'clock petal. I think this petal is dished, like this in cross section, so it will catch the light at the left hand side. I'll use a little light 2B first with a flat face, so it sits on the surface. The darker I can make this while still maintaining a natural appearance, the deeper the throat will look. And the stamens left white will stand out more. Left white because I have one major rule. Only place graphite where you know it belongs. That protects the virgin white of your paper, and it's the only white we have, and it's helped to almost banish erasing. Now I'll layer with HB to smooth the 2B. Shade in the direction of growth. Imagine this lily has veins along its petals. Any visible lines will look like intentional surface detail or features. Now the HB is beginning to look grainy, and grainy doesn't in any way suggest a smooth and waxy surface, so I'll switch to using a 2H. Essentially I'm doing this. Short tapered lines of HB, slightly longer tapered lines of 2H which smooth the HB, and then slightly longer tapered lines of 2H again which will fade perfectly into the highlight. That's one reason I work dark to light. It's easy to fade out but more difficult to smoothly fade in. Another reason for working dark to light is I can always graft new drawing onto dark shading by overlapping it, and I can do that because all my lines are tapered. It allows me to shade seamlessly in sections. I've decided to break with the plan and establish the shady end of this petal now, but first I'll fade out my guidelines so they will disappear beneath the shading. I'll begin with a little 2B and then smooth it and complete the area with an HB. The values of this area will help me when I draw the cast shadow on the 9 o'clock petal. Now I'll begin at the other end, lightly, and shade back towards the highlight. My reference doesn't show any tone at this point, but adding a little removes the need for outline. Build up values slowly in layers so you have full control over the result. With the shading of that petal completed, I'll begin work on the 8 o'clock petal, and that will help to determine the value of any cast shadows. Look at the lighting arrow. It's quite obvious the 10 o'clock petal will partially shield the light from this petal. That's very useful for two reasons. It provides a distinct value change, so no outline is needed. Well, that's how we see edges in real life. Nothing in life has a line around it. And the other thing, I can use the shadow to describe the three-dimensional form of the petal the shadow is falling on. If you ask me for one piece of advice, it would be this. Always think of whatever you're drawing as being real. It's never a drawing. You are recreating the actual subject. That's why we ran through those questions at the start. You cannot successfully draw what you do not understand. And in this case, we discovered that the petals have a natural thickness. Here, for example, I can use outline because it represents the thickness of the petal in shade. And here, I use the reverse, using the highlighted thick edge of the petal to separate it from the lower petal. Now the shading is complete, the blending begins. You might choose to not blend it, which is a perfectly valid decision. I use three tools for blending: a colour shaper, a tortillon, and my finger. But never ever use your finger directly. The natural oils in your skin will leave fingerprints, and graphite, like forensic dusting powder, will stick to the oil, and it cannot be removed. I'll begin by using my finger wrapped in plain toilet tissue. Don't use any that contains oily moisturisers. Cheap and thin is best. Using small light circles, gradually spread the graphite into the white highlights, avoiding any highlights that you pass that you want to remain white. When you blend, remember you are lightly redistributing graphite, not pushing it into the paper, so use a light touch at all times. You can then, if you want to, blend light to dark with a clean piece of paper. That will remove some graphite and lighten and smooth the highlights. And stay away from the dark areas or you will lighten those too. For small areas, use a tortillon or even a colour shaper, which absorbs and so removes less graphite than a tortillon. When you next visit your local art store, look outside of the drawing section to see if you too can find useful tools intended for other mediums or crafts. Anything you can put to good use. Finally, let's complete the drawing. I'll add some tone to the stamens. They need to sink into the shade from which they are emerging. I'll also use a thin edge of blue tack to clean up the stamens higher up. This is only tone spread by the blending, so it should remove easily. And I'm cleaning the anthers too. This lily is soft and gently curved, so I want strong contrast and sharp edges in the anthers to separate them from the petal behind. It will make them stand out. I'll build in as much contrast as I can. I'll use anything that will make them look different from the petals, and above all, sharpness. Remember, soft edges merge adjacent planes, sharp edges separate them. And a final piece of advice: when you intend to blend, careful application is the key to success. Hurried or careless shading will always produce poor results. Blending cannot obliterate blunt or hooked ends or completely fill gaps. It's your pencil that produces an evenly toned or gradated area, not your blender, which can only smooth out irregularities. Only when the preparation is carried out with care will blending correctly perform its function.